Transportation advocacy to me is just really amplifying the value of the service that we provide every day through mobility options, via the bus, the train, the van pool, your bike. All of those access to opportunities really mean something to individuals, and advocacy is a way to share that story and to really amplify the meaningful nature of transit and transportation.
Transportation and transportation advocacy, to me, means a lot of things. Personally, when I attended the University of Washington, I took the bus every single day to and from Redmond when I commuted, and that was the opportunity that I had to experience what it meant to be a transit rider every single day. Now in the legislature, advocacy is so important, hearing voices, hearing stories from so many folks that are impacted every single day by multimodal transit solutions, and it's our job as a legislature to take those voices and enact it into law.
Transportation advocacy is critical for me, for the rural area. We need more people speaking up about helping people get from one place to another for economic vitality, for community engagement, reducing isolation, access to all kinds of services and education. It means a full, rich community when we have what we need in transportation.
And transportation advocacy matters because, there's people who need transit to be able to get around, that can't drive, can't afford to drive, are too young to drive, aged out of driving, and get trapped when we don't have reliable transit options, or we have to rely on favors from friends and family, which is a possibility, but it's not always the only, the best choice. And so transit matters deeply to us, to live connected lives, to be part of our communities. And when it's not working, we get really stuck and we get depressed, we get lonely, all those factors of social isolation that can really sink in. So we are committed as non-drivers to making a system work better for us. And that's why advocacy matters.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thanks so much for being here today. I'm Iz Barang. I am the Education and Engagement Manager at Transportation Choices Coalition. And we've partnered today with HopeLink and Snoqualmie Valley Mobility Coalition with funding from Washington State Department of Transportation and the Rural Transit Assistance Program to bring you today's advocacy workshop. If you haven't yet, feel free to grab some coffee, some pastries, some snacks. We have water back there, and settle in. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that today's gathering takes place on the traditional lands of the Snoqualmie people and other Coast Salish tribes. These First Peoples have lived, thrived, and stewarded this land and its waters since time immemorial. We honor and express deep gratitude to the tribal governments, communities, and ancestors, past, present, and future, who continue to steward this region. We recognize their enduring relationship to the land and commit to working in ways that respect and uplift their histories, cultures, and sovereignty. And to officially kick us off, I'm excited to introduce Megan Altimore, the CEO of HopeLink, who's going to share a few words about HopeLink's role in this work and why today matters.
Thank you so much, Iz. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Snoqualmie Valley Rural Transportation Advocacy 101 event. That's more applause. There we go. My name is Megan Altimore, and I am the CEO of HopeLink. I do want to mention as well that I use she, her pronouns. We are honored to be partnering with the Transportation Choices Coalition, the Snoqualmie Valley Mobility Coalition, RTAP, and WSDOT to be here with all of you today. And we want to thank as well the Riverview School District for hosting such an important event. Transportation access is a key priority to HopeLink, and I know all of you. The Snow Valley Mobility Coalition was established in 2017 with a goal of enhancing the regional transportation network across the valley. The coalition and its partners have made significant progress in the last 8 years, but we have a long way to go to keep our communities connected and moving. I'm excited to hear from our panelists today about their thoughts on the importance of advocacy in transportation. Thank you so much to Michelle Allison, General Manager of King County Metro, King County Council Member Sarah Perry, State Legislator Osman Salahuddin, and author and advocate Anna Zievarts, of Disability Rights Washington. Our communities are stronger, healthier, more equitable, and more vibrant when every community member has access. Thank you all in advance for what you will do in the coming months and years with what you learned today. I will close with a note on advocacy that always makes me chuckle. Excuse me, and sorry I sound ridiculous this morning. A local friend and colleague loves to remind me that 20 years ago when I was new at HopeLink, I whined about how much I hate advocacy and please don't make me do it. And now I spend a lot of my time working to educate our community members and our elected officials about the critical needs of our community members experiencing poverty. I will never miss an opportunity to plug for our advocacy priorities. What a difference 20 years can make. Have a great day, and thank you all for your commitment to growing and expanding rural transportation networks. Now I'd like to welcome Iz back from the Transportation Choice Coalition. Thank you.
All right, now I want to share a little bit about who Transportation Choices Coalition is and why we're here today. TCC is a statewide organization that advocates for better transportation options for everyone in Washington. That includes buses, trains, sidewalks, bike lanes, but it also means making sure that funding and policies behind those systems actually serve the people who rely on them. We're here because we believe transportation should work for everyone, not just those who live or drive in major cities. We advocate for progressive policy and funding opportunities, and we lead major ballot campaigns to fund and defend transit and support better transportation options across Washington. TCC also does our work through education, engagement, and events like this one that's happening now. Here's a photo also from another transit advocacy workshop that we conducted with young people last year. Today's workshop is designed to help you understand how decisions about transportation are made, why it matters, who decides, and how you can have a voice. We also hope to build your confidence to advocate for what your community needs, whether that's more frequent or reliable service, better infrastructure, or more accessible transit options. This is also an opportunity to connect with your neighbors, organizers, and leaders who share your vision for a more connected, equitable Snoqualmie Valley. Now it is my pleasure to invite our fantastic panelists to the stage, and I'm going to turn things over to Kirk to get us started.
Hi, all. I'm Kirk Hovenkotter. I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition. And I want to give a huge shout out to Iz Barang, our Education Engagement Manager, for pulling this event together. Iz has only been on the job for 2 months and has already pulled together this incredible event. I have worked for 12 years in transportation advocacy across the country. In that time, I've really seen the importance of transportation advocacy, especially in rural areas. Rural areas don't have the population, they don't have the job numbers that really make their priorities rise up to the top of the list in many cases. And that's why stories and advocacy from communities are so powerful and so important. But as LeVar Burton would say, don't take it from me, we have an incredible panel here who are going to talk about why this is so important. So I'd love to welcome up our panel to join us to have a conversation on advocacy. We're joined by Michelle Allison, the General Manager of King County Metro, the largest transit agency in the state of Washington. King County Council Member Sarah Perry, representing District 3, where we are today. State Representative Osman Salahuddin, Washington State's representative from the 48th District. Not this district, very close, but Osman's greatest resume item is that he's also a Transportation Choices Coalition board member. Thank you, Osman. And Anna Zivarts, Disability Rights Washington's advocate and a national and global leader on disability rights. This is an incredible panel that we have here. So let me dive into it. We've got the mics?
Yep.
All right, can you hear me okay? Can we check and make sure the mics work?
Hello.
Hi all. Thank you all so much for being here today at our Rural Transportation Advocacy 101. Michelle, I'm going to start it off with you. Can you just introduce yourself and share a little bit more about what you do every day?
Absolutely. I'm Michelle Ellison, the General Manager at King County Metro, which is the 7th largest transit system in the United States and North America, actually the largest transit system in Washington. We move over 300,000 people a day. We have 6,000 folks inside the organization that make it happen. But more importantly, we're a mobility agency. We provide bus service. We're the human power behind light rail. We have those community vans. We partner with HopeLink and all of the other ways that mobilities work through connecting people to the fixed route system. But more importantly, for me personally, we create access. Access to opportunity, access to community, access to things that make living that full life possible. And that's really important. And for me, this conversation here is deeply personal, as I grew up in a teeny tiny town in Homer, Alaska, that did not have any transit, that did not have any infrastructure that is part of King County Metro, but it did have mobility. And it had it through really creative ways, through carpooling, through neighbor friends saying, hey, we're gonna make that 5-hour trip to Costco, do you need anything? This community focus that made mobility happen. So for me, the understanding of what transit and transportation is much more than just the infrastructure. It's about the value that it provides individuals. And that value, no matter where you live in the county, should be part of your choice. And that is a really important part of the conversation today, is making sure that there's access to opportunity that's provided through mobility, and Metro wants to be part of that solution for people throughout the county.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Councilmember Perry, same question to you. Can you share a little bit more about your work and what your day-to-day looks like?
Yes, thank you for having me. Appreciate being here. Love Duval. So Sarah Perry, King County Council District 3, and my district is the largest physical district in King County. So King County has 1,500 miles of unincorporated road, and 500 miles of those are right here in this district. And that's significant for us. We have fewer people. There are 250,000 people that live in unincorporated King County, and it's so spread out. So fewer people per bus stop, but much more windshield time, as my late husband used to say. Much more windshield time. So to me, this is really, really important because of community, because of building access, because of connectivity and economic vitality for our communities. We have to be able to get from Duval to Redmond, from Carnation to Falls City, from Falls City to Snoqualmie Pass, and all of the different areas we have, from East Lake Sammamish to Snoqualmie and Stevens Pass and I-90 to Highway 2 in this district. It's 1,000 square miles, as I said, so really, really important to create that connectivity. And Snow Valley Transit does an awesome job, as does HopeLink, in helping that happen, but we need more often, and weekend and evening, and we all know that. And that is for exactly what Director Ellison said, which is having the opportunity and the access. So very, very important that we are paying attention to the folks who live in the big backyard of King County, for whom it's actually the front yard of King County. We all need to be investing in this space, and so having opportunities to really look at that together, I think is very important. Did I answer the question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember, thank you for having us in District 3. Representative, can you share a little bit more about your job and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for having me. Thank you to Transportation Choices Coalition, the best part of my job. So I am Osman Salahuddin, State Representative for the 48th Legislative District, which, as Kirk mentioned, does not cover this area, but includes the cities and towns of parts of Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond, as well as the Points community, so Medina, Hunts Point, Yarrow Point, and Clyde Hill. One really important thing that I do want to mention is that I also used to work for Councilmember Perry. So I got to know this district really well, Duval, and a lot of our a lot of the region that does not get serviced, say, by the light rail when it's opening up, does not get serviced by a lot of parts of what Sound Transit includes. And so how do we, at the state level, make sure that we're prioritizing not just the voices of the residents that I represent in the 48th, but include opportunities for all of the workers who live in Duval and Carnation and Falls City to be able to get to Redmond, to be able to get to not just their jobs, but to recreate, to share time with their families, or really just enjoy the rest of the region. I think as a legislator in this legislative session, I can talk a lot about how difficult it was. I can talk a lot about how choices had to be made that may or may not serve in the best interest of rural versus urban versus suburban communities. But at the end of the day, when we pass our transportation budget, when we work together across the aisle with people all across the state, I think that was the most important impact that I learned, is that you need to have conversations. So the beauty of being here today, or making sure that we have space for opportunities like this, is that we are in the room together. We're able to talk through speakers from all different backgrounds and hear from all of your voices, which is, to me, the most important thing. So I'm really excited about learning more from this conversation.
All right, and Anna, can you tell us a little bit more about your work leading the Disability Mobility Initiative at Disability Rights Washington?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Anna Zivarts here. So I want to say, when I got here today, it felt a lot like where I grew up. I was born outside of Olympia, Washington, in Thurston County, rural area similar to this. Lots of trees, no transit service, no shoulder, no sidewalks. And I'm someone who was born with a visual impairment, which makes it not possible for me to drive. And so my work at Disability Rights Washington, and broader than that, really focuses on the needs of people who, for whatever reason, don't have easy access to driving, whether that's because of a disability, because of age, because of the cost, because of documentation. And there's a lot of us in this state, around 25 to 30% of the state population. And there's more non-drivers, right, in areas that are lower income, and that includes rural areas as well. And so when we think about transportation access, it's so important to not just think about big cities. And I'm fortunate that I can live in Seattle now, and I can afford to live in Seattle, but many of the people that we work with at Disability Rights Washington can't afford that, especially if you're living on limited income on disability benefits. You are more likely to be in a rural area that perhaps is more affordable, or living with family, because that's where your community is. And we need to make it possible for everyone, no matter what, to be able to get where you need to go, to be connected to services, to be connected to your community. And so glad to be part of this conversation today, where we can talk about that, how we can make mobility work better. And then also just to think sort of bigger picture, mobility is half the equation. The other half is that land use and housing piece. How can we make it possible for the distances we have to travel to be less? And this is not just true for cities, it's true for smaller communities as well. Can we get the healthcare and the childcare and the other services we need in our communities so we don't have to travel such far distances? So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let me dive in. I'd love to go through this question. I'd love to get each of you your perspective on it. Can you share a little bit more about what role does advocacy play in your work on a day-to-day basis? And Michelle, can I have you start out with that?
Absolutely. So King County Metro is part of the King County governance model. So the council is our board, and there's 9 of them. And let me tell you, they are all very active advocates. So your voice matters when you engage with your council member, and they tell us the needs of the constituents that they represent, and ensure that the choices that we're making and the policies that they're putting forward works toward those goals. And that can be really hard and challenging in a county environment, but it's also really impactful, because that is the service we provide needs to reflect the needs of those jurisdictions, and the council members know that very, very well. The other part for us as an organization, we truly believe in community engagement. And community engagement is us going out in rooms like this across the county and saying, what do you need? What works for you? Instead of leading with, here's our plan, what do you think? And advocacy is folks coming to those spaces and telling us their story, telling us where their needs are, having a good dialogue about what the next best step is. Even if we can't solve the entirety of what that group or that community needs in one moment, we want to take the right steps toward that vision that the community has, because that's our success. Our success is meeting those needs. And in resource constrained environments, when you only have so much people power and so much money and so much that you can do in a time, having that active conversation, that two-way dialogue where there's the ability to say, okay, I hear that you need this. We can only get so far right now. Is that the right next step for you, or do you have another priority? And really fact-checking our assumptions is really, really powerful. I tell folks inside the organization all the time, you have to tell the story. You can't just lead with what you're trying to do. And the community and advocacy telling us their story is really powerful too. When we hear the value of that trip, you're making it possible for me to go to X thing. You're making my kid be able to have X experience. The value of what we're providing is far beyond the actual transaction. It's the experience. And advocacy gives us those stories so we can, though, try to get more resources and really understand where to invest the resources that we do have. It's a really, really powerful partnership between the service we want to provide and the reason why we're providing it.
Yeah, oh, please.
You ready to go jump in?
No, please.
No, I was going to pass it over to you as professional advocate. Can you share what advocacy means like for you?
So as vice chair of the council, the King County Council this year, and chair of local services and land use, and a member of the TREE Committee, which is the Transportation and Economy Committee, we spend a lot of time talking about this, spend a lot of time advocating for the unincorporated area. And contrary to to some perspectives, our district is the wealthiest district in all of King County. So we have a median income of, something like 162,000?
Always a staffer.
Representative Sullivan. And Duval actually pushes that up, something like 192. It's crazy high income compared to, say, the median income of 75,000 in the Kent area. And so paying attention to the wealth in this area, it's a much higher income than many areas of Seattle. And so paying attention to that and knowing that there is that income, that we still have 15,000 people in our district or 12,000 people in our district that earn 15,000 or less as a household median income, that we can't greenwash that. We have to pay attention to where those needs are and making sure that we are responsive in each of our communities. But access is really, really important. Community is really, really important. And the roads are important. So in my job, we're not advocating for more roads, but our roads budget is going to ground down to zero in 2029. We are losing our federal grants. We will have nothing in 2029. And so that piece is really, really important. We need our buses to drive on something safe. We need them to be able to access roads that are close to you, to go to stops that are close to you. Snow Valley Transit has some remarkable access and opportunity as long as the drivers are there for everybody and the mechanics, but we have to make sure that both of those things work together. Yeah. So we have safe streets and safe buses. That's something that's very important. So it's usually, we're not over here on the council advocating for more money on streets because we want people to get out of their cars. Well, we don't have that luxury as much here. And we need to make sure that our cars can ride on safe streets and our buses can ride on safe streets for our area. And so there's a lot of advocacy I'm doing right now with my council colleagues on the council to think about that constructively to get us through that 2029 point. And we've been really working collaboratively together on this potential that's coming. So that's something that's very important, and I work on that in my role on the local services and land use. And it's really, to me, community means everything. And as we come into this next time in our country and in our state and in our county, we are going to need to lean into our communities for our community. That's going to we are going to have to rely on each other much, much more. And so our farms are very important. As we saw in the pandemic, being able to get sustainable food is very important. It's all tied into healthcare, free healthcare or reduced healthcare, housing access, and sustainable foods. And we have the most amazing farm system out here, and we need to do what we can to sustain and support that as well, which means being able to get to those farms. That will become very, very clear soon, as it did in the pandemic. And so we want to be here to support that. And talking to folks in Seattle, it's tougher to make that case. It's really important to make that case for folks in Duval and Fall City and Carnation, the lower valley, the upper valley, and making sure that we are always talking about how Metro connects all of those things. Access to housing, access to community, access to sustainable food, access to reducing isolation is a very, very important part of what we need to be supporting. So I do that as vice chair when things come through. I work on initiatives of the local services and land use, because critical areas ordinance is what's on the table this year. And then also really looking at transportation and economy through the tree committee is something I spend a lot of my time on.
Thank you for your leadership on that. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to move to the 3rd district. That's Representative Salahuddin, to you, what role does advocacy play in your work at the state?
Yeah, so I think the advocacy that myself and my colleagues do, it's really critical to understand your district. So as Councilmember Perry shared about District 3, the 48th legislative district at the state level is also, just happens to be one of the wealthiest across the state as well. But there are those pockets of community members and residents who do not have the fortune to have the level of income or the stability or the resources and access as so many other neighbors. And when you break that down to 49 districts across the state, there are millions of people that are either struggling in one way or another. And when we're talking about transit advocacy, I appreciate all of my colleagues up here in talking about all of the other forms of advocacy that we need to be looking at, whether it's housing, whether it's environmental protections, whether it's making sure that we have even food security ties into how people have access to the nearest grocery store, whether it's by walking, bus, or if they have to drive. So the importance of advocacy in me understanding my district comes from talking to community members and community leaders like all of you in this room. In my district, I really like to go out to community. I will share community to me is not just these organizational leaders. I've been on a tour to try to go talk to as many elementary schools as possible because our future, the decisions that we're making right now for the state are going to impact years and years of decades of our state's future. And so I go and talk to elementary schoolers, and somehow the most important issue that they are telling me about is the traffic in our area. So I was expecting, we want more candy, we want better school lunches, but traffic is on the minds of these elementary schoolers. And so how can I as a state representative work to address issues that maybe their parents are telling them, but they are sitting after school, getting home, less time for them to play because they're sitting in traffic, making sure that we are focusing not just on the issues that are shared by community members who are the ones taking the bus or driving, but also the ones that are growing up in these communities. And it's really important for me to take all of those voices. When we're talking advocacy in Olympia, I will say the most important thing is just sharing your story. The opportunity that folks have across the state, 49 districts, means 2 representatives and a senator in each district who really are experts in their own district. They don't necessarily know what might be going on the other side of the state, what might be going on across the issue areas. But if you are able to share your story, if a bill comes up, if you have the opportunity to testify, whether it's in person in Olympia or even virtual testimony or writing something in, those emails, those stories are all really important in helping frame a narrative of why something is important. There's a project in Carnation that I know about specifically around a roundabout that I only know about because I used to work for Councilmember Perry. Top issue, with regards to some transit advocacy here in the district, but I was able to talk to my colleagues about it in Olympia without actually living in or representing Carnation. So it's those stories, that experience to be able to take down to Olympia that is really important, and I encourage all of you to, as the time comes, to advocate for those issues.
To you, Anna.
Sure. I guess how I've been thinking about advocacy, I work for an advocacy organization, so that's what we do. But the way I've really started
thinking about it most concretely in my head is how can we make sure the people who are most directly impacted by a particular issue get to be in the room where decisions are getting made that will impact their lives, our lives. And so a lot of our advocacy right now is focused on how do we open those doors? And sometimes we have to push a little hard to get them open. But how can we get those most directed folks in the room? In the transit space, this looks like making sure that transit agencies have people on their governing boards that rely on transit, that ride transit even. And so we were in the last legislative session in Olympia successful in passing a piece of legislation that will allow transit agencies across the state, not King County, unfortunately, because it's got a different governance structure, but 21 transit agencies across the state to appoint transit riders on their boards so that we have folks who are really using that service and care deeply about that service and are invested in making that service work for their communities in the room. So that's sort of the space that my head is in right now, is how can we create those spaces? And I have to say, shout out to King County Metro. My sort of learning about this came from initially participating in the King County Metro Equity Cabinet, which King County Metro convened in 2018 to start thinking about long-range planning for the transit agency. And that, having that space where I felt for the first time as someone who used transit, but who didn't have a planning degree or like an engineering degree or that kind of expertise, where I was actually being listened to and where we had agency leadership and elected leaders showing up and learning from community members, that was a really exciting model. And that's a model I hope to see in more places, and that I hope to see taken a step further where we get those community members in boardrooms more often.
And actually, just to add on, you mentioned elected leaders. There are a host of elected leaders here in the room that are strong advocates in your community. So I was wondering if we could take a moment to recognize anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please, if you're an elected leader, would you be willing to stand up so we can embarrass you? Yes, Mayor Hawkins. No, thank you so much for your leadership and being here this morning. So, you all hear a cacophony of voices, whether it's transit riders, your constituents, from lobbyists or interest groups advocating to you. I'm curious though, what is helpful to hear from the public when you're making decisions? Michelle, would you be willing to start out?
Absolutely, and we hear a couple ways to answer that question. We hear a lot, and not everything is consistent, right? We want more here. Please don't put more there. Put it over here. I don't want any transit. I want transit all the time. So there's lots of inputs coming at us, and we have both limited amount of resource in all the ways that resource is defined. And so how do we understand where to take all of those competing voices and advocacy points to get to where we need to be? The thing that really helps us is what Anna was mentioning. Before we start out on an investment scheme of kinds, we do service changes, which is the way that we make resource investments in our system, is we start the process by hosting community events, by setting up mobility tables, by inviting folks who live in that district and say, what does a good vision and outcome look like for you? And we do that over and over and over again for a very long time, and we iterate together with those voices around the room, and those voices don't always agree. So for us, it's also facilitating a conversation with the community so they can talk to one another about what a vision looks like for them. I don't really want all of that service here. I would prefer weekend service. Okay, I didn't think about that, but I really need this connection to this library or to this food bank over here. What if we make this change to the route, right? So the community talks to one another about what the vision looks like for them, because really we're just facilitating a service. We have beautiful transit plans, but they don't always work. So we need to check them and adjust them, and we need that diversity of opinion in a room together, which really creates a more durable outcome. The other thing that's really, really important for us when we're making these decisions are those voices and stories that we talk a lot about, but also using the system, making sure that that data is there for its usability. So if you're advocating for something and you're getting closer to where you want to be, I sure hope that each of you also feels empowered to go use that system. Go advocate to your neighbor too, not just to us and to the decision makers, but use that advocacy outward as well, so that when we put that service out there, there's people who use it. Because if it is being used, it will stay. If it is not being used, we will have to make choices, because we're in an environment where we need to put the resource in the place that is going to make the best benefit. So I would say for us, it's really understanding what the outcome looks like, figuring out how to set up a table so we get those voices to tell us if that outcome is the right one, implementing it, and having those voices actually use the system and then tell us, yeah, it's working as intended, or not quite, you need to make some adjustments, and we can always do that too.
We're so lucky to have a director like Director Allison. Can we just recognize her, please? Really. So similar to what Director Allison was saying, community engagement is paramount. I learned a lot from hearing from Salwa early on. Her story, her family story. I learned from Adair Hawkins, her family story, her own story. People telling us what's important that I can't know because I don't have that lived experience. Yeah. I am a big believer, which my policy analyst Robbie over here smiles politely, but it drives him nuts. But we do believe in roundtables. Roundtables are really, really important, because when you have one voice, your experience is very, very similar to mine. So I'm at the end of my first term, and I can't tell you the number of people that say, do it this way, why are you doing this? And then I get this similar number of people saying, do it this other way, why are you doing that? Right? And they're not hearing each other. They think they're speaking the truth, the solid truth for everybody. And in fact, they're speaking their truth. And there are 250,000 bosses I have that have their own truth. So trying to figure out what does that actually mean in a way that we can consolidate it to give the message to Metro, or to Snow Valley Transit, or to HopeLink, or to whomever is working through these transit systems. So bringing those groups together is really important. We spent a lot of time, Metro came on out and met with the mayors from the Upper and Lower Valley consistently to talk about, what do you want? What do you want on Highway 18? What do you want with the pass? What do you want that gets us through this elbow through Monroe? What's happening with all of this? And they came together consistently to look at and listen to what they were asking for and what's possible. And Metro is under incredible constraints. Just holding, the crown's heavy, holding it with grace. And those cuts are going to come even more so. So could we do public-private partnerships in this? Could I give my car payment? Yeah. Could I make a decision? Could we make decisions that would improve our access locally? Could we do that? Corporate support, sponsorships, organizations, individuals? I don't know, but I know that those conversations with the tribes and the hospital and the mayors and our transportation systems and Metro coming and listening carefully to what was needed. Could we do everything? No. Could we start on a path? Yes. One of the things that happened as a result of that and those outreach conversations was recreated or created a new bus route for Cottage Lake. Cottage Lake was a squeaky wheel, and they just came at just organized, and it wasn't personal, but it was relentless. And they just stayed on it, said, we don't have any other access here. And so it became this issue of access. There weren't as many riders, but the access where there was no other access was really important. What do they have? They have a brand new bus route because of that. So that kind of personal advocacy is super important. Another one that Representative Saludin brought up was the roundtable. We've been working on that for 2-3 solid years. Carnation took the lead, and then we realized it can't be Carnation's lead because it's outside of the city of Carnation. So it has to be King County's lead. And so then we had to work in deep partnership with Carnation to get all of the people we could at the table, the Washington State Patrol, the fire department, Carnation representation. Remlinger's right in there somewhere. And speaking of Remlinger, they hosted those meetings with the mayors every time we had them, and would willingly continue to do that, I'm sure. It helps us. But that roundtable conversation we ended up pulling a group together, going to Olympia, and we had the chair of transportation for the Senate, the chair of transportation for the House, and the vice chair, Senator Ramos, and several others there meeting with us. And there were 20 of us around the table. And they walked in and said, holy cow, this is usually the level of meeting we would have for a $50 million ask. $3 million. For them, that's actually couch change. And so they listened, they advocated, they're on board, and it did not get called out as a roundtable in the budget itself, but the squeaky wheel could make that happen if we continue in that conversation. And we have to lead, and King County is doing everything we can to bring in the representatives and the senators into that conversation. Why for that particular piece? It's because it's a choke point. The north, south, east, west, we really have to pay attention to making sure things move through smoothly and that people can get out of and into Carnation, Duval, Snoqualmie, North Bend, and beyond. It's not just for Carnation, it's a regional issue. And it will continue to be an issue as our population increases. So that's a very, very important piece of advocacy that we can do, and we can do it in Duval, and we can do it for our sidewalks, and we can do it for our lights. Those are things that we need to be paying attention to, and to know that your voice absolutely matters. I can tell you that the squeaky wheel does get the grease. You have to stay in it.
Councilmember, can I just have you give this Advocacy 101 presentation? That was just, I'll just sit down.
I do want to say you are right in there. It opened my eyes to go. It was a Move Redmond.
A Move Redmond walk and talk.
And that's where I met Osman.
The one impact I've made in my entire life was I, got politely asked Osman to come to a walk and talk we were hosting at Move Redmond to highlight the improvements around the light rail stations that were coming in Southeast Redmond, and that was where Councilmember Perry got to meet Osman.
And then we needed somebody. I just started, and he applied, and the rest is history. But you were such an incredible advocate for rolling and all-inclusive mobility, and have helped me open my eyes to the needs in that particular walk and walk since then. So thank you.
Now I'm just blushing. Representative, the question to you, what types of squeaks do squeaky wheels need to make to be the most effective?
What types of squeaks do squeaky wheels need to make? My colleagues up here, Councilmember Perry and Director Allison, have shared a lot of great opportunities to get that wheel squeaking right. But I will say, I just want to make a huge shout out to Transportation Choices Coalition, to HopeLink, and all of our organizational leaders who, you're on the ground doing the work. These leaders are hearing voices, hearing stories from so many community members. And I think, there's a lot of opportunity when an individual goes down to Olympia and testifies, shares their story. But when it's combined with the impact of an organization like TCC, like HopeLink, and is brought forward together to the legislature, we do see that organizational power and the coalition that it's brought up, especially. I mentioned earlier, 49 districts, there's 98 legislators, and not all of them sit on the Transportation Committee. Hardly, a fraction of us do have our hands in transit advocacy, for example. And so how do we get the right people to hear the right stories? I think that's really the expertise of what Kirk brings and TCC and HopeLink bring to our communities, Snow Valley Transit, to this region, making sure that we have those, our trusted leaders on the ground doing the work. I will say that will get the squeaky wheel working right.
Well, let me pass it off to someone who really won huge changes and huge policy wins in the session this year. Anna, what do you feel works well on advocacy?
How to be squeaky. One technique we've used is something we launched in 2021, and that was, in the midst of the pandemic, we've done a lot of advocacy work documenting the stories and organizing a bunch of non-drivers from every legislative district in our state to be active and to share their stories and to know what was happening with the transportation budget. But we didn't have a way to really connect to elected leaders and leaders of transportation departments, transit agencies, so that they understood our stories. And at that point, we couldn't really do anything in person. And so we came up with this idea for the Week Without Driving as a way to challenge elected leaders and others in sort of leadership positions throughout agencies to try to themselves understand a little window of what it's like to be a non-driver, to get around for a full week without driving themselves. They can still get rides, they can ask for rides, they can pay for rides, they can walk, they can try to reschedule things, move where they're located, all of those pieces. And I think for the elected leaders who have participated over the years, it's been something that has, even if they just did it 1 year, and even if they were only able to do 1 or 2 trips, really opened their eyes to some of the gaps in our transportation system. Yes. Yes.
District 3, that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, and it really, I mean, like when we were passing some legislation this year on the Senate floor, I think Senator Lovelet called out Week Without Driving as what made her understand why it was so important to have transit riders in the room when talking about transit. So that's, there's some flyers and stickers in the back on the TCC table. You can grab some. It's September 29th through October 5th. This year, and it's now grown beyond Washington State to a national challenge. We've had all 50 states join us, organizations from all 50 states, over 500 organizations.
And global.
And global, yeah, we've got Canada and Australia, and yeah, it's cool. Yeah. So if you want to learn more, if you want to try to do the challenge, if you want to invite your electeds to come on a walk roll audit with you or a transit ride along. I know Redmond, Move Redmond has done both of those, TCC. It's a way to build that relationship with your transit agency leadership, with your elected leaders, and to uplift the stories of people who are relying on transit to get around.
And just to throw in one more thing, especially as you noted, the dates of September 29th through October 5th, understanding that the variability in weather, we haven't even talked about that, will play a huge impact in decisions that are made, making sure that we're creating systems that do keep that in mind, because right now, with the beautiful weather that we're having, would love to, jump on the water taxi, take different modes of transportation, but we, at the state, at the county, local level, are really trying to keep in mind the impacts of all factors, including the weather and climate, as we're making these decisions.
All right, well, let me jump to our last set question, then we can go to questions from the audience. What lessons should this audience and the audience who will be watching this recording take away?
I think what you're hearing consistently is coalitions matter, getting those voices of the people who maybe have multiple perspectives to share an ask and to share the reason why that ask is important to that coalition is really, really important and something to take away. And what's also what I want to say, and I want to give Anna a big shout out, what Anna does so well and can really model for other folks who are doing advocacy is there is a persistence to how she does advocacy. It is consistent and it is pervasive, and we know exactly when she comes into a room that she's going to have an ask. But I will expand that. There's also a relationship. Advocacy can't be done without a relationship. Otherwise, there's sort of that, who are they? What is it about? Do I care? Like, is it a trusted source that's coming to me with this information? That relationship that we have is so important, because when we do something that matches her ask, she'll publicly say thank you. You know what's lovely for an organization that has hundreds of thousands of asks is when someone says thank you, that mattered. That was important. So also publicly acknowledging those choices when they go your way is really, really validating and builds on that relationship, so that door just gets open wider and wider and wider every time you come with the next version of what you're asking for. So it's a two-way street, right? Building that relationship, getting some credit, understanding why we do those things. Those are all really important ways to build successful advocacy that lives beyond your first ask and gets you to your second and your third, because it's going to take time to get to where you want to go. So you have to build that trust in that relationship and then give some credit for everyone, right? The organization needs to give credit for the advocacy group, because there's huge benefit there to acknowledging that we're serving on the public ask, and then giving a little kudos to the people who make the tough choices, also helpful. Council members, elected officials, they don't get the thank you calls. They get the why did you calls. So also giving them credit when they make hard choices is really helpful to build an enduring coalition and really have successful advocacy that lives beyond that one moment.
Oh, that's great. That's great. The vitriol has permission right now to be out there. And the kinds of things that come across our emails are shocking. Calling on our better angels. Well, there are also those devils over there causing you to do and say really nasty things that you don't have to. There's free permission. Mm-hmm. Often those emails go without a name or an address. They just spew. So when you get those lovely emails that recognize the work that you're doing, it's really great. It's just really great. And Carnation's city manager, Rhonda Ender, is a champion of this. So we could put our energy anywhere. There are 1,000 requests at us at any given time. And I am usually way, way out there in the community. I have been less out there lately. I'll come back, but I'm usually very much out there. But so many asks are on each of us all the time. And so when we choose to put our energy into a Carnation roundabout, that we know we have to lift up the invite to get WSP to the table, to get the firefighters to the table, to get all of the different advocates to the table, flood control district and all these different things, the federal government to the table, and we put our energy into that, and we are willing to lead on the advocacy of something because we believe in the value of it. To have somebody like Rhonda reach back out, not once, not twice, but half a dozen times with a thank you, unsolicited, sometimes unresponded to, which is maybe why I'm doing this, over and over, it matters. It matters that people take the time and recognize that when you're doing that work. And we don't ask for it, we never ask for it, but it does matter to representatives. It matters that you're spending time doing something and people see that you're doing something. Because for everything you're doing, there's 999 other things you're not doing that others aren't getting the attention for. So you're choosing carefully, you're choosing wisely, and you have to choose for what you think matters on the highest level. And all of this that we're doing also ties deeply into our strategic climate action goal of having all of our buses electric by 2030, right?
Well, it's going to be later than that.
It's going to be a little bit later, but the goal's there. The goal's there. So all these things in place, our infrastructure, all of these different pieces in place, it's part of what we're trying to do for the environment as well, and it touches so many different things. So yes, that advocacy matters, and also this happened with Woodinville. It's 13,000 people, I think. In the city, and I think Duval is probably in the city and unincorporated about that, maybe, I don't know. But they wanted something to happen with their transfer station between Woodinville and Kirkland. They did a campaign, it was a petition. They got thousands of people to sign a petition for this thing. They didn't do anything, but Kirkland had. And the mayor called and said, "What can I do?" And I said, "Well, we're hearing from you, but we're not hearing from your residents. That matters to us. Get your residents." And he did. He put it out there. Thousands of signatures on this petition. It matters. We listen. We want to know that it's not just, one person's idea and they're really, really loud and squeaky about it, but there are 100 people behind them that feel something completely different. That matters. We have to balance all of that. So having those petitions, whatever the issue is, matters. Showing up on the 4th Tuesday of the month at 1:30 in Seattle, in Chambers, or on Zoom to say, "Hey, please pay attention to this transportation issue, because I'm going to fight for you guys, but I'm up there with 9 other council members. I need me and 4 others to get to yes." So if you're showing up, especially from District 3, to advocate for that on the 4th Tuesday for 2 minutes, it matters that they see you. It matters that they hear from you, Adair. It matters that you're out there doing the comments, all of us. And that goes for any area that you might have, showing up for in session, showing up outside of session, making those calls.
Well, I forgot the question after.
No, I'm inspired too. What lessons should this audience take away?
What lessons? Listen to what Councilmember Perry says. That's the lesson. I would really, echo what has been said, but continue to participate in, opportunities like this. Seeing all of you in the room today is incredible, and it shows that you are not only committed to the advocacy portion, but that you're committed to moving forward in what's next. I think the beauty of the work that we do is that there's always something next. There's always something that can be done, more that we can work on. And hearing not just the voices, but having the energy in the room is really, really important, because a lot of times that energy can seem worn away, especially as we see things happening from the federal government that are uncertain or even chaotic, as we're seeing it with our state. There were many moments where we were making decisions that would help a lot of people but may harm others, and we really have to have the energy in the room, all of you continuing to lean in, and I'm really fortunate, I will share that I'm the youngest member in the legislature, and the opportunity to advocate for a voice in a generation that historically does not see representation at these levels, that means a lot to me. So continuing to engage and encourage young voices and young folks, especially, I mentioned elementary schoolers, but there are a lot of high school and college age students who want to get involved, who want to participate in this work, be in these rooms, but just don't have that access. I think I was looking at this beautiful artwork, and access was one of the biggest words written on the first slide, because we need to make sure that whether it's access to services, access to resources, access to information, that we are prioritizing that for our community members. So that's the biggest lesson that I would take away, and roll back to what Director Allison said in the beginning, is that access will be our most important focus area.
And that was something we heard loud and clear when we did this Transportation Advocacy 101 for youth last year, and really proud to have helped one free youth ride free with so many of the people on the panel here, which allows everyone under the age of 19 to ride transit, ferries, trains for free in Washington State.
I just want to build off that piece real quick. I think that what you both were sharing around youth engagement is so important. And I think it's important because in my experience doing advocacy, what often works is figuring out who currently is being left out, who has the least choices, who does not have mobility access because they're not old enough to drive, because they have to get a parent or a caregiver who may or may not have access to driving themselves to drive places. Who is stuck at home and not having social connections because they have to ask for favors to get places. Bring those voices to your work, find those people, and figure out how they can participate. Because guarantee that they want to, but there are so many barriers often to even being able to come to an advocacy meeting, right? Or feeling like that's a space that is welcoming and inclusive of you and what you're going to bring to the table. So in the advocacy work we do and what I've seen working in other parts of the country, and what I'm excited about is those places where people are actively working to bring people in who haven't previously had the opportunity to be in the room, and to focus on the needs of people who have the least choices, who have the least mobility access. So encourage you to consider that as you're building your asks, as you're telling stories, that you are very intentional about whose stories get uplifted.
And if you haven't checked out the story map that Disability Mobility Initiative pulled together, it's inspiring. It's so powerful. We will make sure the link gets out to everyone who attends. All right, I think we have the moment now to ask the audience for, let's say, 2 questions from the audience for the panel before we wrap.
Audience question. Who do I contact about bus stop needs in my community?
Yeah, thank you so much for a good question. I'll answer from an agency perspective, and then I'm sure there's other folks who will have guidance for you. It's really important that Metro hears from you. Yep. It's really important that you tell us, this is what I'm seeing. I don't need you to solve everything. I need you to understand these 2 things are really important. Span of service, that frequency, that night service, you're totally right. Night service is a really big deal right now. Everyone wants us to go a little later. So there's a resource conversation there. And then these are the dead zones for transit that we need to make some connections to, and we want you to prioritize these things. With a planning background, I think you can appreciate it takes us a minute, right? These are not things we can turn around immediately. They take a little bit of time. But for you to be able to engage with the agency, and we will reach back out to you and say, okay, tell me more, right? Let's walk through what some of this stuff looks like together. Sometimes a fixed route solution is the solution. Sometimes we can make that happen. That's a very expensive solution. It takes a bus, it takes a driver, it takes a vehicle maintenance worker, it takes a whole bunch of infrastructure behind that bus. Sometimes we can more readily solve some of these really hard rural connectivity issues with maybe another tool. And SVT knows this really, really well. They're an incredible partner of ours. But we could do something maybe more community-based, or a first mile, last mile connection, a van, something else. There are things that we need to talk to you about to really understand what treatment might get you closer to your goal soonest, right? Because that vision of a fixed route line is a very expensive one for us as an organization that is down 1,000 operators who has these needs across the size of the county that we do. So we need to have a dialogue to really understand what could be beneficial for the moment that we're in, instead of that 5-10 year plan, which probably has a really good solution built in it. But that's a long lead time for you and your community to wait. And you probably want to add.
I really appreciate the question. It's challenging because of the resource issue and the ridership. And I know that one of the values that Metro has is rural support beyond ridership. So there's this other value that has to do with rural connectivity. And so making the case for, hey, if they stopped at Preston, would there be the riders? And it's a catch-22. You know, I'm not stopping at Preston because there's no bus. Now there's a bus, but I've gotten into this other system and structure and logic of my work system that works for me. So it's going to take me a really long time to figure out that I need to stop there because there's a bus now, right? So it has to do with public access and public trust and being able to maintain the line and not cut it short because funding's going to cut again. Like what is it that we can do to make sure that we're increasing the focus on the trust of the rider to know that Metro will be there. When they take you somewhere, they're going to bring you back, and there will always be that bus. But making the case for that is important, making the case for the understanding where the priorities are for equity in South King County, where the priorities are for rural in our district, and really focusing on the things that we have identified as those priorities to make the case for why this makes sense and why resources should come here. And go to those meetings and go to the tree meetings and show up at the, 2 minutes, make a case at the fourth Tuesday of every month when you don't have to be on the agenda. You can talk about anything and come in and make that case. So stay in front of us so that my colleagues are hearing this. We're all hearing that this is an issue. If you just had something that was a little bit later, just a little bit later or a little bit earlier, that SVT can't take and that Metroflex could maybe take on, maybe not, or a community van or any of these other options. So that was one of the things bringing the mayors together we were talking about, is Metroflex working for Issaquah and Mammoth? It did, right? Could we do that in the valley? Could there be something that augments what SVT is doing? Does SVT itself need more? Do they have the drivers? And if not, could we do these other things? What's that blend and that relationship to get creative? And we're gonna have to get creative, right? But showing up matters. And I know you have a full-time job, and I'm saying to you, on top of what's really on your plate already, show up. But it's the showing up and the knowledge that you have as a planner, the focusing on how we get to yes. Like any good marriage, you're gonna talk to that person about what you know matters to them and how you will help them reach their priorities. So getting to yes for both, that messaging really matters.
Any thoughts there? All right, I think we can take one more question from the audience before we let our panelists go.
How do we get people with different views on public transportation to collaborate?
You know, this is the age-old question of how do we make progress? If I want to go fast, I go alone. If I want to go far, we go together. Amy Biggs and I agree on some things and disagree on some significant things. We have to be in conversation about the things that we do agree on. We also have to be in conversation about the things we don't agree on. And we have to not make it personal. We have to stay to the mission in the middle. You know, I can't imagine, but if we talk long enough, we're going to find things we disagree on. Yeah. We have to stay in the mission, but you have to actively seek out people you disagree with, or you don't understand, or who don't want what you want. You know, we're sitting here making decisions about transit and domestic violence, transit and children not having food, and those two are related, domestic violence and no food and transit. They're all related, but you have to be able to see that map, that visual of that, to see how they're all connected. And we have to find out why somebody getting what they want, doing their best thing, doesn't also mean that you can't have your best thing, right? And so leaning in instead of backing away. When somebody disagrees with you, Osman and I had a conversation once about unions and new immigrant families. And I am as pro-union as they come. We were raised in the union family. Our kids are really aware of union. Our marriage together was union focused and supportive. And everything that we do has to have union bug on it because of that. So I'm talking to Osman. Sorry, Representative Salahuddin, and he said, okay, that's great. What about, where does that intersection between supporting new immigrant businesses that are owned by newly arriving folks who aren't yet in that union system, but your value structure is to support that, and unions, what are you doing with that? It stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't had that thought. And we had to have that conversation, and I'm continuing that conversation with his father and others, just to understand what does that mean. And so finding areas where there's disagreement and leaning in a little bit more about why, and drawing those people in. And start in your unlikely places, where you think people are going to be against what you're talking about. And when you see that, or you feel that sort of microaggression about whatever, ask for a cup of coffee. Find out who they're connected to. Educate yourself about their issues so that we can get a win with that in mind. Bring them into the tapestry of the conversation. And that can be said about every single topic. Bring people into the tapestry of the conversation by doing your own homework to almost come up to conversion to their point of view. Almost come up to the moment where you're going to go right on in with them against your own interests, just so that you can understand their point of view and factor that into how you can have a win-win. That is the work of this country and this county and this district.
On that beautiful, beautiful statement, can we give a huge round of applause for this panel? I heard a lot of powerful statements. I love this. Michelle, I heard from you the need to reach out to Metro, to communicate to Metro. Representative Salahuddin, I heard from you the need to listen to youth. Anna, I heard from you the need to include different voices in the decision-making process. And I think there's so much for everyone here and those watching to learn. Thank you so much for your time on this. Can I give a huge round of applause to General Manager Allison, Councilmember Perry, Representative Salahuddin, and Anna Zivarts. Join me. Thank you all so much for being here today.